Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive today into an allergic condition that's, well, it's complex, often gets missed, and maybe most importantly, it seems to be spreading outside its usual home base.
That's right. We're talking about lipid transfer protein allergy, or LTP allergy.
And this isn't your standard food allergy conversation, is it? It's one where, the difference between a relatively minor reaction and something really serious like anaphylaxis often hinges on these hidden factors. Cofactors.
Yeah, and if you look at the bigger picture, LTP allergy is just a massive headache for doctors trying to diagnose it, and frankly, it causes huge anxiety for patients.
I can imagine.
The protein itself, its structure, is unusually stable. That means it doesn't break down easily with cooking or processing, so you get reactions from things like ready meals, maybe a specific curry powder you wouldn't suspect.
Right.
And really crucial for our listener, the reactions are often unpredictable. They frequently need that cofactor, could be exercise, could be alcohol, to actually push the body into a full systemic reaction.
Exactly. And our listener, the learner, sent over some really interesting stuff, recent clinical practice guidelines, some new research looking at how UK clinicians are getting to grips with this. Because it's relatively new territory for many outside the Mediterranean. So the mission today, really, is to figure out how we reliably tell the difference between someone who's just sensitized, they have the antibodies, the test is positive,
right,
and someone who actually has the allergy, the clinically relevant, potentially severe condition.
And that takes us right to the core nugget, doesn't it? This research points towards a surprisingly accurate tool for making that distinction.
Okay.
We're going to spend some time really digging into a specific diagnostic marker, one that's maybe been overlooked a bit. It's a ratio. It involves the patient's total allergic load, their total IgE, and their specific IgE, to the main LTP component, PRU-P3.
PRU-P3, that's the peach one, right?
That's the one. And this ratio, well, it's showing really surprising effectiveness in separating the truly allergic from the merely sensitized, especially in this population where it's emerging, like in Northern Europe.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning.
Yeah.
The basics. What exactly is a lipid transfer protein? And, why is its structure such a problem? Why is it such a potent and persistent allergen?
Right. So LTPs, lipid transfer proteins, they're found pretty much everywhere in the plant world. Ubiquitous.
Okay.
They get their name from what scientists think they do, moving lipids, fats across cell membranes in the plant. But for us, in allergy, we're mostly concerned with type 1 LTPs. They're typically quite small molecules, maybe 9 or 10 kilodaltons.
Yeah.
And these are the ones that are overwhelmingly the most allergenic for humans.
Right.
Interestingly, their job in the plant seems to be protective. They act like a shield, helping the plant deal with stress, things like drought, big temperature swings, attacks from pathogens.
So they're tough little proteins, basically, built for plant survival. How does that toughness translate into causing trouble for us?
Well, this is where the chemistry directly leads to the clinical problem. That tight, compact, almost spherical structure that helps them survive harsh conditions outside the plant. It also means they have high thermal and proteolytic stability.
Meaning heat and digestion resistant.
Exactly. Heat resistant, digestion resistant. Think about, say, the common pollen-related food allergens, like the PR10 proteins in birch pollen or a fresh apple.
Right, the ones that cause oral allergy syndrome.
Precisely. Those are fragile. You cook them or they hit your stomach acid and poof, they break down almost immediately. That's why those reactions are usually just mild itching in the mouth or throat.
Okay, that makes sense. So the LTP stability lets it get past those first lines of defense.
Exactly right. It survives boiling, baking, frying, and the acid and enzymes in your stomach. It reaches your gut largely intact. And that means it can get absorbed into the bloodstream and trigger a systemic whole-body immune response. This stability is key. It means the allergy isn't just about raw peaches or raw tomatoes. You can react to highly processed foods, composite things, dried fruit in a cereal bar, concentrated tomato in a pasta sauce.
That stability also helps explain the geography, doesn't it? Why it was seen mainly as a Mediterranean issue for so long.
Yeah, historically, absolutely. The highest rates of both sensitization, just having the antibodies, and actual clinical allergy were definitely seen in places like Spain and Italy.
Right.
You'd see sensitization rates in adults coming into allergy clinics reaching maybe 9%, even 12%. The theory was, and largely still is, that the LTP in peaches, PRU-P3, was the main culprit, the primary sensitizer.
And peaches are everywhere in Southern Europe.
Exactly. High consumption, high exposure. So the allergy really took hold there first. And for decades, the general thinking was, well, it's not really a big problem up north.
But that's clearly changing. The sources you mentioned, the guidelines, they confirm it's now being diagnosed much more widely, including Northern Europe. What's the evidence for this spread, especially in the UK?
Well, we don't have exact prevalence numbers for the whole UK yet. We're missing those big population studies. But all the recent data confirms, without a doubt, that LTP sensitization and actual allergy are being recognized and diagnosed.
Yeah.
We're seeing reports from Germany, Belgium, Austria, Poland, and definitely the UK. There was a survey done by the British Society for Allergy and Clinical Immunology, BSCI, that we'll be drawing on quite a bit.
Right.
And it confirmed clinicians right across England and Scotland are diagnosing this. In kids, in adults. It's not just a niche Mediterranean thing anymore. It's a clinical reality UK allergists are facing now.
And who are they seeing? Is the typical patient profile in the UK similar to what was seen down south?
It seems slightly different, actually, based on the smaller UK studies we have so far, particularly for adults. The data suggests affected adults often fall into that 30 to 40-year-old age group.
Okay, relatively young adults.
Yeah, and interestingly, they seem more likely to be female. We don't have much data on children in the UK yet. That's a big gap we need to fill. But there is evidence, similar to Southern Europe, that sensitization to that key marker, PRU-P3, can start quite early in childhood.
Right.
But the main picture emerging in the UK seems to be an adult onset, or at least adult diagnosed, condition often affecting younger working age adults, which, brings its own set of lifestyle challenges. Okay, so when we get down to the clinic, what does LTP allergy actually look like? Its fingerprint, if you will, is defined by two really big complexities. First, the huge variety of foods that can trigger it.
Right, because the protein is so similar across different plants, it's highly cross-reactive. So we're talking a massive potential menu of problem foods. What are the main triggers UK clinicians are seeing?
It really is a broad spectrum. The most common triggers reported in those BSASI surveys are, maybe surprisingly for some, tree nuts and peanuts.
Really?
Yeah.
Banana fruits.
Often, yes. Followed closely by peaches, tomatoes, apples, other fruits, and also cereals. If you break down the fruits, you see things like apple, cherry, peach, plum, raspberry, strawberry, kiwi, grapes.
Okay.
And for vegetables, tomato is a big one, especially, as we said, processed forms like puree or paste, but also things like cabbage, onion, lettuce, pepper, aubergine.
That point about tomato puree really highlights the processed problem again, doesn't it? How common is it for UK patients to react to these ready-made or composite foods?
Oh, it's incredibly common, and it's really one of the defining challenges of managing this condition. Patients frequently report reactions to things like curry mixes, pizza, especially tomato-based sauces, pre-made pasta sauces, ready meals, desserts, breakfast cereals, even snack foods. Like dried fruit and nuts mixed into a protein bar.
Right.
Because the LTP is so stable, cooking, boiling, process of it often concentrates the allergen rather than destroying it.
Right.
And another key thing for patients to grasp is where the allergen is concentrated in the plant. It tends to be more abundant in the peel or the skin, and also in the pips or seeds of fruits and vegetables. And things like how ripe the fruit is, or whether it's been juiced or concentrated, that definitely affects how much LTP you're actually consuming.
That's a really practical point for managing diet.
Yeah.
So with this enormous list of potential triggers, tomato, hazelnut, apple, wheat, how did doctors figure out the core sensitization? Is there one main anchor allergen they test for first?
Yes, there is. The anchor is PRU-P3. That's the LTP from the peach.
Got it.
PRU-P3 is generally considered the most likely primary sensitizing allergen. And because its structure is so stable and it cross-reacts widely, it acts as the best general marker for potential LTP sensitization across the board.
So a positive PRU-P3 test signals a general risk for LTP reactions.
Exactly. It suggests a risk across many other plant species. Now, its structure is similar to LTPs in other fruits in the same family, like apples and cherries, the Rosaceae family. But, and this is important, it might be subtly different from LTPs in things like hazelnut or sunflower seed, which is why we'll need to talk about testing a panel later on.
Okay, makes sense. Let's pivot to the cofactors then. This seems to be the mechanism that makes it all so unpredictable. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how someone can eat, say, a peach fine on Monday, but eat the exact same peach on Tuesday after a run and end up with anaphylaxis. How do things like exercise actually trigger a reaction the food alone wouldn't cause?
That really is the central mystery and the central danger of LTP allergy. Cofactors don't cause the allergy itself. What they do is lower the threshold needed to trigger a reaction, or they ramp up the severity of a reaction that might otherwise have been really mild, maybe just some mouth itching. And while globally, maybe 30% to 40% of LTP reactions involve cofactors, the UK data suggests it's much, much higher there. Potentially up to, get this, 70% of reactions in diagnosed UK patients seem to be driven by cofactors.
70%. Wow. Okay, so managing the cofactors becomes absolutely critical then for preventing serious reactions. What are the main ones reported in the UK?
According to the sources, the big players, the primary cofactors reported by UK clinicians are exertion, and that means any kind of physical activity. Could be intense exercise, could just be walking quickly, running for a bus,
All right.
and alcohol consumption. Then you've got a list of secondary cofactors too. NSAIDs like ibuprofen are reported quite frequently.
Oh, painkillers.
Yes. Also, having a viral infection at the time, menstruation, fasting, stress and anxiety, even sleep deprivation.
Can you paint a picture? Give us this sort of classic high-risk scenario to make it really concrete for people listening.
Sure. Let's imagine the ready meal runner, say a 35-year-old professional in London. Maybe they're stressed from work, that's cofactor 1. Perhaps didn't sleep well, cofactor 2.
Okay.
They grab a quick ready meal for lunch, maybe a pasta dish with a concentrated tomato sauce. There's your LTP allergen. Later that day, they pop an NSAID for a headache, cofactor 3. And then they head to the gym for a really hard workout, cofactor 4.
Right.
That combination, the food plus multiple cofactors hitting at once, dramatically lowers the threshold for a systemic reaction. And boom, they could have an anaphylactic event that the pasta alone would never, ever have caused.
That makes it incredibly clear. And then you mentioned some things can play a dual role, acting as both an allergen source and a cofactor.
Precisely. Alcohol is a prime example, especially wine and beer. Alcohol itself, probably because it affects how permeable your gut lining is, acts as a potent cofactor, letting more allergen get absorbed. But wine and beer also naturally contain their own LTPs, so they're hitting you twice, potentially. And similarly, cannabis, it contains its own specific LTP called CAN-S3.
Interesting.
And that BSCI survey actually highlighted this. Nearly a third of UK clinicians reported seeing associations between cannabis exposure and allergic reactions in their LTP patients. So again, dual role possibly at play.
But before we get into diagnosis, let's just quickly touch on the pollen paradox. This confuses a lot of people. Normally, being allergic to pollen might sometimes offer a bit of protection against related food allergies. Why doesn't that seem to happen with LTP allergy?
Yeah, what's really fascinating here is how the sheer stability of the LTP allergen seems to just override that typical immune pattern. So people in the UK with LTP allergy very often also test positive for grass pollen, birch pollen, the common PR10 and profilin allergens.
Right.
Now, in the Mediterranean studies, having those pollen allergies was sometimes linked to less severe food reactions. The idea being that maybe the immune system was kind of busy dealing with the fragile pollen allergens, diverting attention from the food LTPs.
But that's not what the UK data shows.
Seems not. The UK data suggests that even with all this background pollen sensitization, these individuals still frequently report systemic symptoms from food, including anaphylaxis.
So the LTP is just too potent to trigger.
It appears so. The stability and potency of the food LTP seems to punch through any potential protective effect from the fragile pollen allergens. This clinical severity is really what makes LTP allergy fundamentally different from standard pollen food syndrome. And one other pollen point clinicians should be aware that sensitization to LTTs found in certain pollens themselves, like mugwort pollen, ARTV3, or plane tree pollen, Playa3, is also being seen as a feature in UK adults with LTP allergy, maybe even a primary sensitizer in some cases.
Okay, so you've got this mix of wide cross-reactivity, tons of potential food triggers, and this huge role for cofactors. It sounds like a diagnostic minefield. How do clinicians even start to approach diagnosis when a positive test doesn't automatically mean someone's truly allergic?
Yeah, the guiding principle has to be front and center. You absolutely should not be doing allergy tests without a suggestive clinical history. That's rule number 1.
Right. History first.
Diagnosis really hangs on having both parts. A typical, detailed clinical history you need to ask about reproducible symptoms, how food was cooked, and really dig deep into potential cofactors combined with positive allergy tests. The tricky part, as you said, is that just testing positive for proved P3 sensitization is actually quite common, even up north now. We need a reliable way to filter out the noise.
And this is where that crucial finding comes in, the one from the sources about total IgE. This is our aha.
Yeah.
moment, isn't it? The piece that helps move diagnosis from being a bit of a guess towards something more precise.
Absolutely. This is a really key insight. It came from a UK study that directly compared two groups of adults. Group 1, people who were definitely sensitized to ProP3. Their tests were positive, but they were clearly not allergic. They ate peaches, tomatoes, nuts all the time with no problems.
Okay, sensitized but tolerant.
Exactly. Versus Group 2, people with confirmed, clinically diagnosed LTP allergy. And when they looked at the overall immune picture, specifically their total IgE levels, the difference was, well, it was startlingly clear.
Okay, let's break down that data. What were the average total IgE levels in the allergic group compared to the sensitized but tolerant group?
The study found this really significant inverse relationship. The group with confirmed clinical LTP allergy actually had substantially lower average total IgE levels. The mean was around 1,187 QUAL.
Lower. Okay.
Contrast that with the sensitized but tolerant group. Their average total IgE was much higher, a mean of 2,724 TUAL.
So wait, having less total background allergy antibody, but a positive specific test for ProP3 makes you more likely to have the actual allergy. That seems counterintuitive at first glance. Why is that?
It does seem backwards initially, but think of it like this. Your total IgE is like the overall level of allergic noise in your system. If someone has a really high total IgE, say 2,700, it usually means their immune system is busy fighting lots of battles, maybe severe eczema, bad asthma, major allergies to dust mites, cats, grass pollen, you name it.
Okay, high background static.
Exactly. In that context, a positive specific IgE test to ProP3 might just be a tiny blip, a bit of background cross-reactivity drowned out by all the other major allergic responses going on. It's not the main focus of the immune system's attention.
It's about the signal-to-noise ratio.
Precisely. Now, flip it. If someone's total IgE is relatively low, say around 1,100, but their specific IgE to ProP3 is elevated, what does that tell you? It suggests that a much larger proportion of their total allergic firepower is specifically directed against that LTP protein.
I see. Even if the absolute number for ProP3 isn't huge, it represents a bigger slice of their allergic pie.
You got it. It implies the LTP isn't just background noise. It's perceived by their immune system as a primary relevant threat.
And that relationship, that specific calculation, the ratio becomes the predictive tool.
Exactly. The ratio of the specific ProP3 IgE level divided by the total IgE level turned out to be the single most accurate diagnostic marker for clinical LTP allergy in this UK group. It had an excellent statistical measure, an area under the curve, or AUC, of 0.880, which is very strong.
Wow.
And the study even proposed a specific threshold for that ratio, 0.007315. If a patient's ratio was above that number, meaning relatively high ProP3 specific IgE compared to their total IgE, it was highly predictive of true clinical allergy. It had an 85.4% positive predictive value.
That's a game changer for clinicians, surely, moving beyond just a simple positive or negative result.
It really is. It provides a much more nuanced quantitative way to assess the clinical relevance of a positive ProP3 test.
Okay, that ratio is clearly vital. But you mentioned testing panels earlier. What about component-resolved diagnosis, or CRD? How useful is that? And maybe just remind us what CRD involves.
Right, so CRD, component-resolved diagnosis, means testing for antibodies against specific individual protein molecules within an allergen source, rather than just testing against a crude extract of the whole food, like peanut extract.
Got it. Testing the specific parts.
Yes. And it's highly recommended for LTP allergy, especially because we know triggers often include tree nuts, peanuts, or those tricky composite foods. While ProP3 is the best starting point, the best general marker, we can't rely on it alone.
Why not?
Well, think about wheat, for example. The LTP in wheat is called tri-14. It only shares about 45% of its structure, its sequence homology, with the peach LTP, ProP3.
Oh, quite different then.
Yeah. So if a patient's main trigger is actually wheat, or maybe another food that's not in the same family as peach, just testing ProP3 could give you a false negative. You'd miss the real culprit.
So you need to test a panel of specific LTP components to match the patient's story with their immune response. Which other LTP components are important to test for?
The UK research highlighted a few others that were significantly linked to having an LTP allergy diagnosis. ERA-H9, that's a peanut LTP, and CORE-8, the hazelnut LTP.
Okay, peanut and hazelnut LTPs.
Yes. And JUG-R3, the walnut LTP, also showed a strong correlation with ProP3 sensitization. And there's another important finding. Being sensitized to multiple LTPs, the study suggests maybe 5 or more different ones seems to correlate with a higher chance of having severe reactions.
Right. More widespread sensitization, potentially more severe allergy.
It suggests a broader and perhaps more aggressive immune response to this protein family. Also, critically, if tree nuts or peanuts are involved, you must also test for the storage proteins from those nuts, things like ARA-H2 from peanut or Cora-14 from hazelnut.
What's that?
Because you need to rule out a primary allergy to those storage proteins. Those allergies are often severe in their own right and need different management. You could have both LTP allergy and a storage protein allergy, or sometimes one might be mistaken for the other if you don't test the components.
Makes sense. Okay, what about the more traditional allergy tests? First-line tools like skin prick testing, SPT.
SPTs are still seen as the best first-line tool for figuring out which specific foods are triggering the reactions described in the history. A key tip from these guidelines is using the prick-to-prick method.
Where you prick the fresh food, then the patient's skin.
Exactly. But specifically, they recommend using the peel or the skin of the fruit or vegetable because we know that's where the LTP concentration is highest.
Right.
The downside of SPTs, though, is the potential for false positives due to that pollen cross-reactivity we talked about, especially with things like birch pollen PR10 proteins. So to get around that, the recommendation is to use commercial peach SPT extracts that have been specifically enriched with ProP3. These tend to have a much lower rate of giving false positives from those fragile pollen allergens.
Okay, that's a useful refinement. Let's loop back to wheat quickly, because that brings in a related but distinct condition. Weight-dependent exercise-induced anaphylaxis, or WDEIA.
Yes, WDEIA is really important to consider and rule out if wheat seems to be a trigger. Wheat, as we said, contains its own LTP, TRIA14. Now, being sensitized to TRIA14 is actually quite common, but often it doesn't cause any symptoms. It's asymptomatic.
Okay.
However, classic WDEIA is usually driven by a different wheat protein component, TRIA19, also known as omega-5 gliadin.
Ah, okay, different component again.
Right. So if wheat is in the picture, you really need to test for both TRIA14, the wheat LTP, and TRIA19, the omega-5 gliadin. Sensitization to TRIA19 is more strongly linked with older patients and those severe reactions that typically need a cofactor like exercise, hence the name WDEIA.
Got it. Test both components if wheat is suspected. Finally, let's talk about the supposed gold standard allergy test. The oral food challenge, or FC. Why are these actually quite problematic for LTP allergy, even though they're usually the ultimate diagnostic confirmation?
Yeah, it's a bit paradoxical. For LTP allergy, doing a standard food challenge actually carries a pretty high risk of getting a false negative result. And that's clinically dangerous, right? You might tell someone they're tolerant when they're not.
Why the high false negative risk?
2 main reasons. First, the amount of LTP in the specific dose of food used for the challenge can be really variable. You might just happen to use a piece of fruit or a processed food portion that has unusually low LTP content that day.
Okay, variability in the food itself.
And second, and probably more importantly, the cofactor requirement. A standard food challenge is done in a controlled, safe clinical setting. The patient isn't exercising, they haven't taken an NSAID, they haven't had alcohol.
Right, none of the usual cofactors are present.
Exactly. So a patient who is genuinely allergic but needs a cofactor to react systemically might sail through the challenge completely fine in the clinic, leading the doctor to wrongly conclude they've outgrown the allergy or aren't truly allergic.
So when should food challenges be used then?
Because of that high false negative risk, the guidelines suggest they're best reserved for confirming tolerance to foods that have not been previously involved in systemic reactions. So say a patient reacted badly to walnuts but has always eaten almonds fine. You might do an almond challenge to formally confirm it's safe, helping to broaden their diet. But using it to confirm the initial diagnosis of LTP allergy itself is generally discouraged due to the risk of missing it. Okay, so pulling all that complexity together, the triggers, the cofactors, the diagnostic challenges, the core philosophy for managing LTP allergy has to be really personalized, very pragmatic, and laser-focused on managing that cofactor-driven risk.
Yeah, because patients must feel like they're walking on eggshells. The sources mention high anxiety and people ending up on incredibly restrictive diets after maybe 1 or 2 bad, unpredictable reactions.
Absolutely. You can easily see that cycle starting. They have a scary reaction, maybe anaphylaxis. They understandably get terrified, and then they just eliminate huge swaths of their diet. All tree nuts, all raw fruit, maybe all processed foods containing tomato.
Leading to potential nutritional issues and just constant fear. So what's the specific goal of the dietary strategy recommended in the guidelines?
The explicit goal is to avoid that over-restriction and minimize the risk of nutritional deficiencies. The advice for clinicians is clear. Counsel patients to exclude only the specific foods that have definitely triggered systemic reactions for them in the past.
Only the proven culprits.
Exactly. Now, if a food only ever caused really mild symptoms, like just some itching in the mouth, oral allergy syndrome type symptoms, then a more individualized, less strict approach is usually okay. Maybe things like avoiding the peel or just being careful not to eat large amounts when potential cofactors are around.
But what about the cross-reactivity? If someone reacts severely to, say, walnut LTP, should they automatically avoid all other tree nuts, like almonds or cashews, which are generally thought to be lower risk for LTP allergy?
This is a really important point. The guidance actually advises the opposite. Patients should be strongly encouraged to keep eating foods they've previously tolerated, even if they contain LTPs, to help maintain that tolerance. Prolonged avoidance can sometimes lead to losing tolerance.
Okay. So avoidance isn't always the safest long-term strategy for everything.
Right. Now, the sources do acknowledge this tricky aspect of LTP allergy, that sometimes, uniquely, patients can develop new reactions to foods they previously tolerated, even if they kept eating them. It's complex. But generally, maintaining dietary diversity with tolerated foods is seen as the better approach for overall health and potentially for maintaining tolerance.
Are there any plant foods generally considered safer bets, especially when cofactors might be involved?
Yes. The guidelines suggest some foods are generally lower risk or less commonly implicated, especially in cofactor-driven reactions. Things like potato, carrot, other root vegetables, beans, peas. Also melon, though maybe avoiding the pips and skin is wise. And certain nuts like cashew and pistachio seem less frequently involved than, say, a walnut or hazelnut.
Okay, that's helpful. Now, cofactor management seems absolutely non-negotiable. How do you translate that complex science into practical, day-to-day rules for patients?
Education is everything here. Patients need to understand the timing and the intensity. The main practical tool is what's called the precautionary avoidance window.
Okay, what does that involve?
It means avoiding the specific LTP-containing foods known to cause them problems for a set period around the time they're exposed to a cofactor. The general advice is to avoid the food for 4 to 6 hours before planned strenuous exercise.
4 to 6 hours beforehand.
Yes, or maybe a minimum of 2 hours before if it's just milder exertion, like a brisk walk. And then also avoid the food for about 2 hours after the cofactor exposure ends.
Okay, so a window before and after. What's the rationale?
It gives the body time to clear the allergen from the digestive system before the cofactor kicks in and does its thing, increasing blood flow, maybe increasing gut permeability, essentially making it easier for the allergen to cause trouble systemically.
That detailed timing is much more useful than just vaguely saying, be careful around exercise.
Yeah.
It gives patients actual control.
Exactly. It empowers them. And clinicians really need to actively highlight those high-risk combination scenarios. Explaining clearly that going out for dinner, having wine, alcohol cofactor plus potential LTP source, maybe dancing or running for the last train, exercise cofactor, and perhaps having taken an NSAID earlier, NSAID cofactor, that combination dramatically ramps up the risk compared to just eating the food quietly at home.
Understood. Now, given how severe and unpredictable these reactions can be, often going straight to anaphylaxis, the need for an adrenaline autoinjector and AAI seems like it should be automatic, right? Even if someone's only had milder systemic reactions before.
Absolutely. The sources really stress this. They call it the AAI imperative. Because the triggers are so diverse and cross-reactive, because the LTP amounts in processed foods are unpredictable, and crucially, because cofactors can unpredictably drive a mild reaction towards severe anaphylaxis, AAI provision has to be a central part of the management plan, always considered.
Let's talk about the risk assessment for prescribing one. If a patient has actually never had full-blown anaphylaxis, maybe just hives or some breathing difficulty, should they still get an AAI? What's the thinking behind the fact that, according to the survey, about 50% of UK clinicians always prescribe one for diagnosed LTP allergy?
The recommendation is that all patients diagnosed with LTP allergy should have an individual risk assessment specifically regarding AAI provision, even if they haven't had anaphylaxis before.
Okay, why?
The rationale is straightforward. The next reaction is essentially a clinical black box. You just don't know. The patient might encounter a food with a much higher concentration of LTP next time, Or they might hit a novel combination of cofactors they've never experienced before. Maybe high stress plus a bad cold plus accidental exercise.
So the potential for escalation is always there.
Always. Those clinicians who always prescribe an AAI are recognizing that for LTP allergies specifically, the severity threshold is inherently variable and unpredictable. The potential consequences of not having adrenaline available during a sudden, severe reaction far outweigh any minimal risks of prescribing it.
And follow-up is key too, presumably.
Vital. Regular review appointments and checking AAI technique, making sure they have in-date devices at least annually, is crucial. Because of this high-risk profile, and also because, as we mentioned, new sensitizations or reactions can potentially develop over time.
Most of the UK data we've discussed seems focused on adults. What do we know, even if it's limited, about how LTP allergy presents and is managed in children?
Yeah, you're right. The UK pediatric data is pretty sparse. What we know from Southern Europe, places like Italy, is that sensitization to Pro-P3 often starts quite early in childhood, and the rates increase as kids get older, peaking in young adulthood. We see studies where over half the kids attending allergy clinics might be sensitized to one or more LTPs.
Wow.
In the UK, while the data is minimal, the reasonable working assumption is that the range of food triggers and the types of symptoms are probably quite similar to what we see in adults. One area that's less clear is the role of cofactors. We definitely need to ask about them in the child's history, but it's currently unknown if they play quite the same dominant role in UK kids with LTP allergy as they clearly do in UK adults.
But managing kids brings in that extra layer of nutritional concern, doesn't it? Especially with potentially restrictive diets.
Oh, absolutely. Dedicated dietary support from a specialist dietitian is essential for children. The core principle is the same. Only restrict the foods proven to cause systemic reactions. But the urgency is higher in kids because you have to avoid negative impacts on their growth and overall nutritional health that can easily happen with unnecessary fear-driven over-restriction.
Right. Parents might understandably remove whole food groups after a reaction.
Exactly. They might pull all fruits or all nuts or anything with tomato, and that can lead to real nutritional gaps if not managed carefully. So specialized support is key to help families navigate that, keep the diet as diverse and healthy as possible, while still managing the allergy risk effectively.
Looking ahead then, right now, management is all about avoidance, cofactor control, and emergency preparedness with AAIs. Is there anything on the horizon for actually treating the underlying allergy? What about immunotherapy?
Immunotherapy is definitely the most exciting area for the future. Specifically, sublingual immunotherapy, SLIT, where drops or tablets containing the allergen are placed under the tongue using Pro-P3, the peach LTP.
Okay.
Studies done in Spain and Portugal have shown really good results with Pro-P3 SLIT. What's particularly promising is that it doesn't just seem to help patients tolerate peaches better. It often induces tolerance to other non-peach food triggers as well.
Oh, really? That's huge for people reacting to multiple foods.
It is. It suggests that desensitizing to the primary LTP, Pro-P3, might have a broader protective effect across other related LTPs. This could be incredibly beneficial for those patients sensitized to 5 or 6 different LTP-containing foods.
So it works so well, why isn't it widely available yet, especially in the UK?
That's the major gap highlighted in the research and guidelines right now. Currently, LTP immunotherapy just isn't a routine treatment option in the UK. The specific purified LTP products that were used in those successful European studies aren't licensed or widely available for clinical use in the UK healthcare system yet.
Ah, okay. So it's a regulatory and access issue mainly.
Yes. Getting those products licensed and integrated into NHS allergy services is really the critical next hurdle to overcome.
So if we were to summarize the key research recommendations coming out of these sources, what are the main things that need to happen next to improve LTP allergy care in the UK?
I'd say there are 3 main priorities. First, we urgently need more data. We need larger studies looking specifically at UK children and adults to really understand the true prevalence here, how it presents locally, moving beyond just small clinic surveys.
Right. Better epidemiology.
Second, we need research to explore whether pollen LTPs like from mugwort or planecrete might actually be acting as primary sensitizers for some people in the UK that could challenge the traditional view that peach LTP is always the starting point.
Interesting. Looking beyond Pro-P3 is the only entry point.
Exactly. And third, and perhaps most impactfully for patients, there needs to be a real push to evaluate, develop, and ultimately get license forms of oral or sublingual immunotherapy specifically for LTP allergy within the UK clinical setting. #TagOutro table.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize all of that for the learner as they're working through this material.
Mm-hmm.
The real complexity of LTP allergy seems to boil down to two things, right? First, that incredibly stable protein structure, which makes everyday processed foods potential triggers.
Yep, stability is key.
And second, that highly unpredictable relationship with cofactors, which can take a food that's normally fine and turn it into the cause of a severe systemic reaction, seemingly out of the blue.
Absolutely. And diagnostically, the big takeaway, the shift, is moving beyond just seeing a positive test result. Clinicians really need to combine that convincing clinical history, paying close attention to cofactors, with that crucial piece of objective data, the Pru-P3 specific IgE to total IgE ratio.
That ratio gives you the signal to noise.
Exactly. It provides that sophisticated insight needed to separate the clinically relevant allergy from just background sensitization, especially in places like the UK where the allergy is still emerging.
And what really strikes me is the ongoing challenge of managing tolerance. We heard that, quite uniquely, patients might actually start reacting to foods they previously ate without problems, even if they kept eating them.
Yeah, that persistent instability is a real feature. It means management isn't a one-off fix. It's a lifelong process of vigilance, careful dietary choices, and really proactive cofactor management.
That instability, it actually raises a really provocative final thought, building on everything we've discussed. If tolerance isn't necessarily stable, if previously safe foods can become triggers over time, maybe due to new sensitizations or just shifts in the person's immune system, how should that change how we think about allergy prevention?
Interesting point.
Not just focusing on avoiding triggers initially, but maybe developing strategies to actively maintain or even reinforce immune tolerance to foods throughout a person's life, especially for these trickier, more unstable allergies like LTP.
That's a really profound question. How do we actively promote and sustain tolerance long term, not just achieve initial avoidance? Definitely a deep dive for another time.